virtual sanctuary, our virtual Tuesday night jazz at the church. We're so happy to be doing this, and I'd like to first send out a big thank you to Richard Moody for joining us, and also Gordon Miller for making this possible for us. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, and I'd like to just let you know what we're going to do this evening. I have the opportunity to dig into some of the music that I truly love, with a musician that I love what he does. Our very special guest tonight is a wonderful violinist, a multi-genre performer in the violin, from classical to world music, folk music, and jazz, Richard Moody. So we're going to let this play out again for a little moment, and then we'll introduce you to our very special guest, Richard Moody. Or maybe we'll just launch right in. Richard Moody, welcome to Tuesday Night Jazz. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks, Kelby. It's a trip to be here in this 2D experience.
Yeah, I'm so glad you are. Now, is this your first time using this, or do you also use this platform as a yoga teacher as well?
No, I haven't been called to do yet. I mean, I've had an offer, but I decided. But I have used it to connect with my family and to connect with friends.
Very cool. Now, Richard, we're just going to talk a little bit about your past for some of our audience. We're very much looking forward to presenting you with your quartet tonight as planned for Tuesday Night Jazz at the church. But in the current circumstances, we had the opportunity to feature you. So maybe we could talk just a little bit about how you came to be where you are today. I know you wonderful violinist, a wonderful gypsy jazz violinist, but also you have a very beautiful thing that you can do where you bring in these different world music traditions and also classical traditions. I'd love it if you'd maybe just give us a little bit of a snapshot of Richard Moody, how you came to be, what some of your early influences or passions were, and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, well, I'm what I've sometimes described as lacking in firm roots. I was trained classically and pursued that in a very disciplined way in my teenage years, and sort of left it behind at about age 17, and discovered bluegrass and other folk forms, and singer-songwriters, and the same kind of music that people of my age and generation at that time might have gotten into, including like some of the classic stuff from the 60s and 70s. And then, and I gradually got interested in various forms of world music. I got involved with some Ukrainian people, with some Persian artists over the years. I had an interest in Indian music. So I never really firmly got into one thing, which has its pros and cons, but it's definitely kept life interesting. So today I've arrived at a place where I guess I'm a member of the Bills, which is a well-known Victoria sort of supercharged acoustic group. I'm a side musician with the Wayland Jennies. I have a group called Tobacco and Rose, which is one of my main projects, which is about song. It's basically a singer-songwriter project written around experiences with plant medicine, largely. And then I have the jazz thing, which is sort of a deep love of mine, where I sort of have my own take on the, not exactly gypsy swing, but like violin jazz, and sort of in the tradition of Stefan Grappelli, but with my own language and style.
Yeah, beautiful. So for you to refer to yourself as someone without firm roots, I hear you as someone who has roots that spread out, that's very well-rounded. So I don't know if you know this, but I actually started playing violin at the same time I started playing drums.
Oh yeah.
I always loved that instrument, but I had an opportunity to study drums when there was a school program available, and I was just I had the opportunity to go one direction, and I still play the violin once in a while. And for me, it's just like an instrument that connects so strongly with the heart. And the expressive possibilities are just beautiful. Sometimes I think as a drummer, maybe I imagine myself more as a violinist who happens to be playing the drums. You know, I love what the violin can do, its expressive possibilities, its ability to play, you know, a single note and have it have so much feeling, or to kind of blur all over the fingerboard like you can do. And I think that's a really special thing. And I've had the opportunity to play with a number of jazz violinists, I think because I seek them out because I love them. And you bring some really unique, interesting things to the table. So without getting too deep into the technical aspect, for me, I'd be really interested. So as a classical background, you have the ability to play in tune all over the instrument, which is pretty cool.
One would hope.
Yeah.
On a good day, yeah.
And then you also have the bluegrass kind of thing that enables you to do a ton of things that classical players and jazz players don't do, like rhythmically comp, for example. And some of the double stop kind of things you do, which maybe you can talk about a little later, or for people in the audience, where you play two strings at once, which you know, is something that's maybe not as common in that way with jazz players in the Joe Venuti or Stefan Grappelli kind of tradition.
Mhm.
And then you've got all this, like the gypsy jazz thing, which I just adore. So maybe what we could do is we could listen to an example from this record. Okay, so I got to better back it up a little bit. So one of Brent's projects that he referred to was the jazz thing. And so what we were planning to present tonight at Tuesday Night Jazz at the Church was a quartet of Richard's own imagination, where he got 4 musicians into his studio for a couple of days and picked some really dynamic, some kind of standard repertoire, and also some less common repertoire, and gave it kind of a classic jazz treatment. And so maybe if you could introduce us to the first tune you might like to hear, we could go from there and we could talk about a little bit of music from there. So the musicians on the album we'll speak of in more depth, but who you'll be listening to is a wonderful pianist named Brent Jarvis, who is also the sound engineer, and a wonderful bass player named Joey Smith. And I was very fortunate to be playing drums on that record. So let's dig into the first cut. And maybe we'll launch into new directions after that. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the first cut that we're going to hear from the forthcoming Richard Moody Jazz Quartet album.
Are you wanting me to introduce it?
Maybe, because I don't know what it is.
Neither do I.
Let's just hear what comes up.
Okay. And then maybe we can talk about it after.
That sounds just great to me. So I'll just, Gordon's on it like a bonnet. Ladies and gentlemen, this... right, everyone. Welcome to Tuesday Night Jazz at the Church. Now, Richard, was that Cincinnati? Richard may have been frozen. I believe that was Cincinnati from the forthcoming Richard Moody CD, soon to be released from a special quartet recording that was produced a number of months ago. Richard, can you tell us a little bit about that tune?
Yeah, it's actually called Cincinnati Airport Blues. And quite simply, I wrote it when I was in the Cincinnati airport. I guess I had the blues because my flight was delayed by 4 or 5 hours. So I sat down and tried to be productive. Can you
Right
hear
on.
me?
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
I also find the airport a great place. I think it's not uncommon. Can you talk a little bit about what your composition, approach is? A lot of people will sit down at a piano, or what would it mean to you to be writing in an airport? Would you need to pull your fiddle out, or would you have it in your ear and be able to, write that down on paper? How would you go about it?
I do it a multitude of ways, actually. It depends on the moment, but I just, that tune's basically a blues, and I just, the blues is the most common form, so I didn't have to write that down. But I did, I just came up with the melody in my head, and I happened to have a notation program handy on my laptop, so I just, in this case, wrote it down on my laptop. I didn't need to take my instrument out. Yeah.
Right on. Okay, beautiful. So if I was to ask you, I suppose the most famous jazz violinist of all time would still be Stefan Grappelli. Could you talk a little bit about Stefan, maybe how you came to first fall in love with Stefan Grappelli's music, maybe a little bit about Stefan himself, and maybe that could lead us into our next selection.
Yeah, well, Stefan was, of course, a member of the Hot Club of France with the famous gypsy jazz guitar player Django Reinhardt. He was a classically trained violinist. I actually think that he went to school at some like private school for gifted kids, or maybe was it an orphanage? I can't remember. That Isadora Duncan, is that her name? The famous dancer. Modern dancer. She had a school, so somehow he ended up there. So he was sort of immersed in the arts from a very early age. Learned jazz. He was a great jazz piano player, and he's actually a really good jazz piano player. And he ended up playing with Django, and those early recordings just have an amazing sound to them that really has remained unparalleled. Like there were some other, and there's some great modern players too, but there's just something about when he had the magic, it's hard to match up with Coltrane or Bird for a sax player, or time where the standard was set by one of these legends.
Absolutely. And maybe
Mhm.
there's something to it too, to when you think about John Coltrane and his quartet with McCoy and Jimmy Garrison and Elvin Jones, there's a chemistry and a syncretism that allows maybe that person to kind of fully realize that creative vision. And maybe that was the same with Django Reinhardt and Stefan Grappelli, maybe in finding each other, because I think that flavor you talk about is also the electricity of the moment of that band. There's an intensity, there's a razor's edge to the music where it swings, whether it's like a kind of a dance tempo, or whether it's a more beautiful kind of laid back number. There's this edge that everyone agrees upon. It seems to be kind of electrifying. Can you tell me about what you kind of feel in that group that makes the Hot Club of France special in the world of Django style bands?
Well, they were special because the edge was largely, I mean, aside from the pyrotechnics of the technique and soloing of ideas of Django and Seven, the edge was largely the rhythm that was created by having at least two rhythm guitars just going chunk 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 chunk, and when Stefan was playing, there were three guitars. So originally when they started, I think they were a quartet, and Stefan would solo, and and Django and I think his brother would play guitar. Then would play rhythm guitar behind him, and then when Django would go to take a solo, he would feel left out because he'd only have one guitar backing him up. So he actually went and got his cousin, because they were like the Roma people, the Gypsy people. They all a lot of them were great musicians. He went out and got his cousin to come and play, so there would be yet another guitar player. So there were 3 guitars playing in the band, and that's where a lot of the sound comes. It's just like the chunk, 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 chunk. 3 guitars, 3 young virile men really going at it really hard on those instruments. And there's also something about the way those guitars and the sound hit the limited yet really classic sounding technology, the microphones and recording technology of the time. Yeah.
And what kind of time period are we speaking of here? So we have the jazz that was happening. Am I mistaken, or was that was in France? They're happening. Simultaneously, you have kind of the era of Duke Ellington. So we're talking like 19 and like halfway through the 30s into the 40s, kind of the heyday of the Hot Club of France. Do you think, or maybe?
Yeah, no, it was definitely in the I think it started in the late 30s and went into the early 40s, and then because of the war, I think Stefan decided to leave France, and he went to Great Britain, I think around 43. So there were only like three or 4 years there.
Wow.
And the Hot Club continued without Stefan after that with a clarinet player, but.
Wow, interesting. So did the Hot Club ever get a replacement violinist, or was that?
No.
Wow, fascinating. And one technical question for you, in case people are thinking about this: you also play guitar, correct? And when we're talking about the comping style of a Django band, would they be playing not only rhythmic unison, but would they be playing similar voicings, or would they try to kind of spell each other off, or would they have different roles when you have 2 or 3 guitar players comping?
I think usually the 2 guys would be playing something similar, but then if Django was playing rhythm to support Stefan soloing, he would do really fancy stuff, different voicings and different rhythms over top, so that there'd be some variation. And
Very cool. So maybe you'd have the 2 players kind of taking over the role, or not taking over, but occupying the same role that maybe a drum set and a hi-hat would have in jazz. And then Django might be able to comp a little bit more freely, rhythmically, kind of over the bar line, things that maybe the snare drum would do.
Yeah, you'd have like 2 guys going.
Yeah.
And then Django would be going. Or whatever.
Right on.
I don't know how to do it, but.
Yeah, beautiful. So that gives a foundation. You've got a foundation with 1 or 2 guitar players and a bass player, and then you have this ability to kind of spread the rhythmic vocabulary out with Django as a 3rd guitar player in a conversational manner with Stefan Grappelli.
Very well put, Kelby.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm not sure if this is possible, Gordon, but we have a piece that I think is next in our playlist called Django's Castle, but I wonder if it might be a great opportunity to see. There's a very beautiful video that Richard sent our way, and if that's possible, that could be really neat for us to see at this juncture. Is that a possibility, Gordon?
Many things are possible. Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah, so I just went searching around today. I hadn't seen this video before, but this is from the, I think from the 60s. And I forget when Django died, but Django would have passed away by this point. But Stefan obviously rejoined with the 2 rhythm guitar players that I mentioned before, Django's brother and his cousin. And yeah, this is quite amazing sounding.
All right, Jangology by a very special group featuring the wonderful Stefan Grappelli, joining in with what Richard was saying was Django's old rhythm section of Django's brother and cousin, along with yet another rhythm guitar player, a bass player, and a drummer. Very cool. So Richard, maybe can you tell us a little bit about where some of Stefan's maybe vocabulary or kind of sound concept come from? You know, when we talk about jazz vocabulary in North America, we think a lot about trumpet players like Louis Armstrong, or saxophone players like Lester Young or Charlie Parker. But was there a parallel evolution, or how did Stefan, do you think, come to be? Like, how did you learn all that chromatic vocabulary and beautiful melodic stuff that you do?
I learned it personally just by trying it out. I didn't even analyze. I never took a jazz lesson. I never analyzed any of Stefan's playing. There's something about the instrument that lends itself to a certain vocabulary that you'll hear in most people that play the instrument. Just the way that the strings are laid out. And then it's also just trying to imitate the vocabulary, the language of the idiom itself, that was created by whatever, Louis Armstrong, and developed by the greats of the era that came right before those guys. And I think he's just like, okay, I've heard it on trumpet, I've heard it on sax, I've heard it on piano, I'm going to try and play it on fiddle. And I think he had, as I said, he played jazz piano, so he probably learned the language that way, and then transmuted it to fiddle.
Very cool. So now maybe this would be a great time to bring up one of Richard's kind of interpretations of a beautiful piece. This is entitled Django's Castle, again, from the forthcoming Richard Moody Quartet album. Do you want to tell us anything about this tune before we hear it, Richard?
Sure, yeah. So if that is indeed the tune that's coming up, Django's Castle is, the original title is called Manoir de mes rêves, which means the manor of my dreams. So it was a somewhat loosely translated, but yeah, it is actually one of the most beautiful tunes there is, in my opinion. It's just a gorgeous tune. That's all I have to say about it.
Beautiful. From the forthcoming Richard Moody Jazz Quartet CD, that was Le Manoir de mes rêves. And maybe, Richard, you could tell us a little bit about maybe how that arrangement worked, or how that felt, or what you wanted to convey. I thought it was very beautiful playing. It was a gorgeous vibe you got into.
Thanks. Well, I mean, there's nothing really original about the arrangement. It's basically a classic jazz standard approach, you know, play the head and then take a few solos and then play the head out. But I don't know. You know, like for me, that's what I wanted to do with this record, was have a very, very traditional, you know, non-original, not in a bad way, but non-original approach. You know, all my life I've done things that are sort of like weird and you know, unusual. So for this particular thing, I wanted to create a document that was like just me doing these tunes in a very traditional way.
Very cool. So maybe you could talk a little bit about why you chose the instrumentation that you chose for the record. Did that also reflect that choice to do a classic jazz kind of perspective as opposed to a hot club of fans kind of setting?
Yeah, partially because I've done that with the before in a couple of attempts of my own, but also playing with other bands. And I have that going with a group called Club Voltaire in Victoria. We play sometimes, so you know, we may release a record with the more hot club version. But I feel like for me at this point in my life, the piano is just a little bit gentler to play over. And it just leads harmonically to, I can go different places. I don't feel quite as constrained somehow to do a certain kind of like, a certain kind of almost macho thing that happens with the hot club instrumentation.
Ah, cool. Just like based on the sort of rhythmic intensity and the
yeah, I think so.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And I guess Brent is a really beautiful choice. I love working with Brent, but hearing him comp behind you, the voicings that he plays.
Yeah, he played amazingly, beautifully. And so did you, Kelby, and all three of you played great, really fantastic. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, our pleasure. And so, you know, when you think about it, with the people that you put on this record, was there a particular maybe quality to Brent's playing and Joey's playing that you were, you know, those are both musicians with whom you're pretty familiar. Was there certain qualities to their playing that you were hoping would be achieved on the record, or hoping they would bring to the table musically?
I think I just expected, I'd played with everybody before, and I knew what to expect from you guys, more or less. You know, it was from playing a few live gigs with you that made me go, okay, this would be really great to record with this kind of support. So that's all, really, you know.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. Well, maybe that could take us into another tune that's definitely a huge classic of the jazz standard world. If I'm talking about Georgia.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah.
It's been a classic for singers like Ray Charles, but also instrumentalists for many, many years. Maybe we could cue that one up, Gordon, and we could have a listen to Georgia from the forthcoming Richard Moody Jazz Quartet CD.
It's a fantastic tune.
Beautiful. That was Georgia on My Mind from the forthcoming Richard Moody Quartet album. What is it going to be called, Richard?
I think it's going to be called Explorations on Jazz Violin.
Ooh, beautiful.
Yeah.
And this record, of course, is soon to be released, but is probably taking a little bit of a break due to a delay of its originally scheduled release dates. So please keep your eyes open for it. Maybe Richard can talk a little bit about ways that you can experience. Oh, actually, this is a perfect opportunity. Is there ways that listeners can check you out a little bit more? They can check out other projects you have or this music again.
Well, this music is not posted, except for maybe one or two hits on SoundCloud. If you look me up on SoundCloud, you can find. But mostly my songs are on SoundCloud. I have 2 releases, including this one coming out this year. So when that happens, it'll be more available for people to check out. I wish I had more to offer at the moment, but I have to sort of coordinate it with the actual release. So.
Absolutely. And so the aforementioned project, Tobacco and Rose, be one that you have currently up. Would you be interested in talking a little bit about that project here, or is that tangential to this, you feel?
Yeah, tangential. Does that mean alongside?
Could be.
You got to go easy on the big words with me. Yeah, it's an album of songs that I've written. I've sort of done an exploration with working with in medicine circle with plant medicines the last 2.5 years or so, and that's been a very inspiring experience. A journey of healing, if you will, and that journey of healing, digging into my own shadow and own process, has revealed like a passion for songwriting that I definitely had in my 20s, in my early 20s. I was a member of a sort of a folk roots rock group called Acoustically Inclined that toured Canada and the States. But I hadn't written so much in the last 20 years until just quite recently. So I'm very, very proud of the songs I've written, and just working slowly but surely to finish this project and release it in the fall, hopefully. So yeah, it's a lot to do. Two concurrent tangential releases.
Beautiful. And would you say that the way these songs of the plant medicine are coming, are they kind of songs that sort of come to you slowly? Are they probably don't follow any kind of same format as you might in jazz, like writing a blues, for example? Do they kind of take their own shape at their own time? Or they
Honestly, most of them have come while on like a certain kind of medicine or meditation retreat where I'm out in the woods with a bunch of other people, or not necessarily the woods, but out in not in ceremony, in these ceremonies. And it'll be like I'll be in my tent or wherever I'm staying, and then it'll just come to me like boom. I'll get like a download for mostly, usually for the lyrics first, but sometimes I'll just have my guitar with me, and something will come to me very quickly. So yeah, so we can look out for that. I wish I could direct people to find that, but if you do look up Tobacco and Rose and my name on SoundCloud, you'll hear a few examples of the demos of these tunes, not the actual recordings, but initial demos from the last couple of years.
Very cool. I've been enjoying hearing them as I've heard little snippets of them at live gigs or online, and they're beautiful, beautiful.
Thank
so
you.
I'm looking forward to when the record comes.
Thanks.
Maybe now would be an interesting time for us to talk about how you have developed as a fiddle player. As you mentioned, you were classically trained and then kind of just absorbed all this other information. If you were to speak to people who are at home and maybe had fiddle sitting on the couch like I do, how would people get started? How could you suggest they would follow to make a little bit of the beautiful sounds that you're making as a violinist in this music?
Yeah, well, you'd first want to, I mean, it's great to be able to play with people. So, of course, like most music, jazz is about communicating and creating chemistry with your collaborators. In lieu of that, so there are ways like there are like apps that will give you a like what's it called, Band in a Box, or there's another one, a jazz app that sort of like will play tunes for you without the soloing, so that you can learn to solo. But basically, what's one approach is to a simple tune like minor swing. We play. Whoops. Sorry about that. So that tune is very simple, especially for a jazz composition. It's just 3 chords, and the first chord is A minor. So one way to solo, not just on violin but any instrument, is just play arpeggios, right? So the 3, or to state it very simply, but it can be more than 3, but the 3 notes of the chord. So that's the first chord of the tune, and then the second chord is a D minor, and then the third chord is a E7. So you're just going up and down. So if any of you have taken any lessons in classical music, we often will play arpeggios. We'll play scales, and we'll play arpeggios. And that's basically what melodies are just like, built on scales and arpeggios, and scales and arpeggios are just patterns. They're very simple algorithms or patterns. It's just to vary the pattern. So I mean, in a very, very, very basic way. Of course, it takes practice. Did you catch that? Have I frozen?
Maybe I'm muted now. Aha! Yes, I heard you.
Okay.
That was beautiful. Cool. I love what you said about as an approach just to play these physical shapes on the instrument, shapes of arpeggios moving up or down, or scale passages moving through those 3 chords, 1, 4, and 5 in that key. And that's traditionally an A minor. You also, the stuff that you play is so often to me very singable. You also, as a singer, you sing on Tobacco and Rose, and you sung backup with the Waylon Jennys and the Bills and all sorts of other stuff. Do you feel that for you as a melodic improviser, singing is important? Do you hear the melodies in your head as a sort of sung sound as you play?
Absolutely. Good point. Yeah. And not everybody is like this. People have different approaches. For me, definitely, I hear it as if I was singing it, and then I'll try and that's another approach anyway. We can do what I just mentioned. We can build over shapes on the instrument. But yeah, it's not the way everybody works, because not everybody hears quite that way. Like, I know for me, like, I'm not a harmonically very complex player, because my brain does not like see those shapes, the very, very complex jazz theory shapes. And plus I haven't studied it so much. So for me, it is bring melodies in my mind. Melody, da 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 da, and then I'll just play it, or something like that, right? I mean, so this is it's a great question. It's another approach.
Wow, can you do that again? Can you do that again for our listeners? Sing something that you might hear over that, just something very simple, and then so we can hear what that process is like.
Okay. Da 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 da.
Ah, beautiful. So for those of us in the audience, to the mind of Richard Moody, that is a simple phrase, which to us sounds like a beautiful classical theme developed there. But beautiful, I understand where you're coming from. And I think that's really helpful for our listeners and for people who are enthusiastic about jazz to understand, those two sides of the brain, where there's the understanding technically what's going on, and then understanding the thing that makes us as listeners, I think, connect with instrumental solos so well, is that the sung qualities of those melodies and the phrasing that exists in a natural human capacity.
Yeah, because the voice is the first instrument, and it's really, I mean, especially when we're younger, we can get really taken away with virtuosity and technicality, but really in the end, nothing sticks more than a Beatles tune, like a simple melody that really connects like that. That's what will stick with most of us and trigger the emotion and trigger the memory, and, not that I have anything against really, wizardry, and I love that too, but technical wizardry and virtuosity. But there's just something, the older personally I get, the more the melody is important.
Well, maybe this is a beautiful segue then into our next tune, which I have queued up here on my mental playlist as being Moonglow, which is a very, very old, beautiful, singable melody.
Yeah.
Maybe we can hear where you take it.
You stopped it?
If you want to say something, go ahead, Richard.
I don't have much to say, except that I played with this group called Swing Sonic for a long time. It was with a guitar player named Greg Lescue from the Guess Who. And this was the title track of that recording. And so I played it for many years, and I always wanted to do it instrumentally. So here we go. Thanks for the opportunity.
Beautiful. That was Moon Glow, a classic jazz standard as played by the Richard Moody Jazz Quartet from the forthcoming album, which is going to be called Explorations in Jazz Violin, if I'm not mistaken.
You
Right,
are not.
right on. Beautiful, beautiful playing. Hey, can you talk just for a second? I know people are going to have heard it, and as I did, the beautiful thing that I think really only jazz violin does in this way is that use of harmonics that you did towards the ending there.
Right. Yeah, well, there's well, you could do it on guitar too.
And bass,
Yeah, it's just
but it sounds so sweet.
on any stringed instrument, there's a halfway between the top and the bottom of the string. If you press down lightly, you'll get an octave. And it's just simple physics. If we take this string, for example, this is A, this is 440. We play halfway between we have 880 hertz. So we've doubled the frequency of the vibration of the string, and that's an octave, and it's the same note. And then so it's just like picking out these partial harmonics. Yeah, go for it, Kelby.
Oh no, oh no.
It's turning into a private lesson
Yeah, if you don't mind,
here.
just tell me a little. And also for the folks at home, so that's really neat. I'm hoping that we have a whole bunch of closet enthusiasts here at Jazz at the Church who, like me, are pulling out their fiddles and saying, "Oh, okay, okay." So, but you played this beautiful phrase of like, and you've only got 4 strings. How did you do that?
Yeah. That's kind of
Yeah.
Stefan did that a lot. That's one thing that I definitely got from him. And it's just playing there's a harmonic up in the third finger of the instrument that is actually 2 octaves above the string. So the string is this note, and the harmonic that I'm playing is 2 octaves above, except this one where I play with the 4th finger is the 5th. So it's like it's an octave and a 5th above. And so you can do that on any of the strings.
Oh.
And yeah, it's just a great little, it's like a bird singing or something. And then from there, there's, I think I used to do Edelweiss. Forget now how. Sorry, I shouldn't have. False information, but yeah, you can play little melodies with it. And then, so those are called partial harmonics, I think. But there's one you can do where you play you hold the 1st finger down and firmly, and then you play very lightly with the 4th finger.
Oh, interesting.
And then you can get any note, not just the ones that are limited to open strings.
Oh.
So I don't know if that made sense to anybody.
No, I think it's wonderful. I think this is the kind of insight into the craft that I think is really special that we can do in this format that we, wouldn't have the opportunity to do in a concert. Okay, now I think I'm going to make a little spot here for Gordon, who's going to come on and talk a little bit about how this works and what happens, if this is a good time for him. And
I want to tell you both how much people are enjoying this. We see the 18 people that are here with us in this live chat format, but I'm also tracking the story on YouTube, and there's a number of people who are following on YouTube and commenting on how much they're enjoying the conversation and the music. So I want to thank you both very, very much. We also need to thank people who have made contributions to Tuesday Night Jazz at the church. We have, over the last year, grown our live audience and have relied on paying the musicians through people who walk through the door and put $10 in the bowl. And it's been a phenomenal experience being able to put that money back in the hands of musicians. And some people are coming forward and helping support this online version of it while we go through this period of not being able to gather together. And so just a real heartfelt thank you from the musicians, from the people who organize Tuesday Night Jazz at the church. Thank you for going online as you did last week and seeking out our Contribute Now button off the main page of the James Bay United Church website. And that takes you right through to a Canada Helps page where you can then make a contribution and type in that you want it to go to the arts ministry or Tuesday Night Jazz at the church. So huge thank you to everyone who's staying on board with us. This is awesome.
Yeah, that's a big help indeed. It's a great thing that we've been able to do at Tuesday Night Jazz at the church, as Gordon mentioned, and to be able to honor the commitments that we made to the musicians who we had hired for the programming has been really beautiful. And then as we look forward, trying to find a way to still keep some of the energy that we were able to be a part of in the concerts in the sanctuary, to be able to try to still have a way to connect between musicians and to connect with audiences. So thank you very much to all of you for, first of all, tuning in and also for helping to contribute as you're able. We appreciate it. One thing that I wanted to do, Richard, is to speak a little bit about the sort of two worlds that I see. A lot of people, friends of mine, know you from two different worlds. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about those. There's your touring with the Waylon Jennys, and also I'm not sure enough about this part of your past, but I think I also had the opportunity to see you with Ruth Moody once, your sister. And maybe you could talk to us a little bit about how you came up in Winnipeg and that folk scene, and if that influences you. And the second question that I'd ask you is, Roy Stife talked a lot last week about the intersection for him between music and spirituality, and for him, his physical side of himself, which is as a marathon runner. And I wonder if you'd feel comfortable or interested speaking if there's an intersection for you with yoga and music. You may be muted, or maybe I just can't hear you.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah, so the Waylon Jennys, and my sister is actually a founding member, so I tour with her, but I have also played with her solo project. Yeah, so my sister is younger, and there's definitely a scene in Winnipeg that actually inspired a bit of the folk roots scene that kind of came to be around the late 90s. We were a little bit ahead of it with this group that I was in called Acoustically Inclined. I think was quite inspirational. And then my sister was not long after that in a group called Scrooge McDuck, or more recently known as the Ducks. And then formed the Jennies. So she's done really well. She's very successful, and tours mainly in the States. So yeah, I was definitely influenced by. I didn't have a folk music education, but just because of playing an acoustic instrument and being able to play along with singer-songwriters, I just kind of fell into it as having some sort of ability to work in that arena, and it's influenced my own career greatly. Yeah, so I don't know if that was interesting or not, but that answers the first question. The second question, yeah, I mean, I think there's this idea of spiritual as being this sort of like up in the air, this sort of airy-fairy gods that may or may not exist, ideas that may or may not have any proper application for us. But really, I think there's a part of spiritual practice that is about physical embodiment and really getting out of our heads and into our bodies. And that's definitely the reason I got into practicing music because of the actual practice aspect of it, using the physical body to make these sounds. I just loved it, and I got addicted to it. And later in life, I got into the habit of practicing yoga as a similar sort of thing, like practicing day after day, doing this thing over and over and over again, because it brings us somewhere. It takes us out of the magnetic, the whirlpools of the mind, is written in the Yoga Sutras. The Yoga Sutras opens with the definition of yoga being the elimination or the taming of the whirlpools or the fluctuations of the mind. So I think music can do this for us. The playing of music can do this for us, and the practice of yoga and different types of somatic embodiment could do for us. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Very cool.
Did I lose you? Yeah. Okay.
I lost you just for when you spoke about yoga can do this, and other forms of can do this for us.
Oh, yoga and other forms of physical practice. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting how many musicians, if I think who we play with, who all practice some kind of form of physical connection, be it yoga or running or meditation, or as you said, the physicality of bringing yourself to a physical mind body practice, centering things such as music, to be present in the moment is pretty beautiful. Well, I think that we have time for one last song, and maybe, Richard, I'll give you a moment just to think about what you might like that last song to be. And I'll just say a few words before we play it, to say that it's been such a pleasure to have as our very special guest tonight, the wonderful jazz violinist, composer, band leader, raconteur, yoga teacher, very special guest this evening, Richard Moody, joining us here at our virtual Tuesday night jazz at the church. It's been a real pleasure, Richard, and I hope we get to connect, as we all do, very soon in the physical world. But I'm so glad that you were willing to take some time out and connect and share your thoughts and these sounds with the listeners today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I'm still loving hearing this record, and I'm so happy with what you guys contributed to it. I'm proud of it. I'm really glad to have done it. And yeah, so this last tune is called Django, and it's not by Django, clearly. That would be a bit narcissistic, I suppose. It's by the leader of the modern jazz quartet, John Lewis, right? And yeah, so this was in tribute to Django. I'm not exactly sure why, but it's just a really nice tune. So yeah, that's all I have to say about it. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening and tuning in. And I really hope that everybody's hanging in there in this weird time where many of us are a little bit isolated, but this is a nice way to connect. And I hope that we get to play music for you live and in person before too many more weeks or months go by. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I hope so too. I'd also like to say just a thank you from Richard and I to Gordon Miller for making this happen. So
yes, thanks so much, Gord, for doing this.
It's my absolute pleasure, and I just want to confirm that the tune that I'm putting up is called Django Take 2 Mix.
Yes, that's the one.
And actually, before we run that, I'd also like to say a little shout out. I realized last night that at 7 p.m. there was what sounded like a salsa band down the street here. I was down in the Cook Street Village, and I could hear this sound, and I thought, wow, I just love it. And a neighbor happened to be on their porch, and Dave Lennon was walking by across the street, and we were all having this conversation. And I understand that at 7 p.m. there's a shout out that happens, a celebration to the frontline workers, to the medical people. And so I'd like to say that from now on, we should include that as part of our 7 p.m. launch. We can all do our own little shout out, because we're all very, very grateful to those people for helping and for being heroes of our time in this capacity. So thank you very much. And we leave you this evening from our special guest, Richard Moody, myself, Kelby MacNayr, Gordon Miller, on technical wizardry from Tuesday Night Jazz at the Church. This is our final song, and we bid you all a beautiful week, and we'll see you next Tuesday. Please tune in. This is Django by John Lewis. Thank you, Richard Moody.
Thank you, everybody.
beautiful Django from the Richard Moody Jazz Quartet from the forthcoming album Explorations in Jazz Violin from Tuesday Night Jazz at the Church. My name is Kelby MacNayr. Once again, thank you to Gordon Miller and our very special guest, Richard Moody. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you next week. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Bird.